All right. Thank you for leading us in music. And I realized I really don't know what happens before they start to go live on the live stream on Sunday nights, because I'm always doing something else. Which, if you don't know, I guess I could explain that. On Sunday nights, I am... since COVID started, before we started services back on Sunday evenings, we had started a small group where we would meet and just basically have a Bible study and fellowship. So there's still a group of us that still do it on Sunday nights. So that's something that we've encouraged other people to do, and any other groups that meet, whatever works for you. But that's kind of a thing, like I said, thing we've been doing since then, and we just kind of stuck with it. And so I do catch the live stream before our start. We usually start at 6:30, so I catch most of the live stream before we really start our Bible study. So I do keep up with things, but like I said, I really don't know what happens before Brock starts talking, because it's all not live stream, but sometimes the live stream goes out. So we're doing what we can today. I'm filling in. In case you hadn't heard, Brock is in the hospital in Osage Beach, or whatever hospital that is. So he's up there having tests. We really don't have much of another update than that. So keep him in your prayers. And the doctors and the whole situation, and Diane to keep him in line as best that she can. But today I'm filling in. It's kind of inspired off of a Sunday school lesson, as most of the things are that I fill in up here. But we're going to be in the book of Jude, which is right at the tail end, right before Revelation. So a nice short little book. I was tempted to just cover the whole thing tonight, but we're not going to go that far. But we will cover a pretty good amount of ground. But we just wanted to start off with a little bit of a background to the book of Jude, since we're just kind of starting in cold and not really leading up to it in like part of a series or anything. But the book of Jude is written, it is believed by Jesus' half-brother, Jude, or Judah, all of which are just different variants of the same name. And he introduces himself as the brother of James. And as you see in verse 1, he just simply says, Jude, a servant or slave of Jesus Christ and brother of James. So he doesn't introduce himself as the half-brother of Jesus, which I think is interesting, because you think you want to get someone's attention. The half-brother, being the half-brother of Jesus would, catch people's attention and try and establish him as, something of an authority. But he instead appeals to his relationship with his brother James. So I think that's interesting that that's how he identifies himself. And of course, his brother James was at this time the leader of the Jerusalem Council. He was a major figure in the early church, also half-brother of Jesus. And then also in a literary sense, a lot of the writing that Jude writes, if you were to do a literary comparison with a lot of the words that he uses and phrases that he uses, is very similar to James on his phraseology. So that really supports that he is James's brother. And he doesn't identify himself as an apostle. If you'll notice, the apostles who write identify themselves in their salutation at the very beginning almost always as an apostle of Jesus Christ, and Jude does not, which he didn't identify himself as an apostle because he wasn't one. So that is, a brief introduction there of some of the context to it. It does parallel a lot of 2 Peter, and we'll mention 2 Peter a little bit here and there. But basically, chronologically, 2 Peter, Peter wrote his epistle warning of coming false teachers and warning of what to look out for in the church when false teachers come. And in this case of this letter from Jude, the false teachers have already come into the church, and they're addressing these. So it chronologically follows after 2 Peter, and he actually quotes directly from 2 Peter in this letter, so we know that it happened after that. But while Peter was anticipating the coming of false teachers, Jude was actually dealing with their arrival. So that is kind of what he's dealing with, and the entire letter is really dealing with false teaching and apostasy, and what that has done to the church and what to look out for, and kind of just really laying it to him when it comes to the false teachers. We don't know the exact audience that Jude was writing to. It does seem to be, that based on his illustrations that he used and the Old Testament references that he used, that is intended for a Jewish audience primarily. But we don't really know exactly. But obviously there were false teachers involved, and that could have been anywhere at the time. So it's not really something that helps narrow it down to exactly where they were and who he was writing it to. So that's just kind of a basic background. Chronologically, it was written probably between 68 and 70 AD, which at 70 AD is the destruction of the temple, and that would have not yet occurred, at least is believed so, because it wasn't referenced in there, and it probably would have been had it occurred yet. So we think it's pretty close to that time, but 68 to 70 AD is the most likely time when it was written, and that corroborates and goes along with the time of 2 Peter. So that's basically what the book is about. It's really the only entire book of the Bible that's dedicated specifically and entirely just to false teaching. And that's basically his one topic that he has in the whole book. So that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about tonight. So we're going to read from Jude. I always say chapter, whether there's a chapter there or not. And it's funny, in my Bible app that I downloaded all this stuff from for my notes, it still says Jude 1. So there you have it. But we're going to read the first 13 verses. If you would stand while I read. Jude, a servant of Jesus Christ and brother of James, to those who are called, beloved in God the Father, and kept for Jesus Christ, may mercy, peace, and love be multiplied to you. Beloved, although I was very eager to write to you about our common salvation, I found it necessary to write appealing to you to contend for the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. For certain people have crept in unnoticed, who long ago were designated for this condemnation, ungodly people who pervert the grace of our God into sensuality and deny our only Master and Lord Jesus Christ. Now I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it, that Jesus, who saved a people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under the gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah had this, and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serving as example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. Yet in like manner, these people also, relying on their dreams, defile the flesh, reject authority, and blaspheme the glorious ones. But when the archangel Michael, contending with the devil, was disputing about the body of Moses, he did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." But these people blaspheme all that they do not understand, and they are destroyed by all that they, like unreasoning animals, understand instinctively. Woe to them, for they walked in the way of Cain and abandoned themselves for the sake of gain to Balaam's error and perished in Korah's rebellion. These are hidden reefs at your love feasts, as they feast with you without fear, shepherds feeding themselves, waterless clouds, swept along by winds, fruitless trees in late autumn, twice dead, uprooted, wild waves of the sea casting up the foam of their own shame, wandering stars for whom the gloom of utter darkness has been reserved forever. Lord, thank you for this day and the chance to be in your house and study your word. And Lord, I pray that you be with Brock and Diane and everyone involved in the medical situation, and that you watch over him and take care of them all. And Lord, that your will be done and your healing happen, and just that your power be witnessed and seen through everything in this situation. Lord, I pray that you bless us this evening. Just help open our hearts and our minds, and just let us receive your word. And I pray that we just learn something from this, are able to apply it to our lives, and just be watchful for those that we should be watching out against. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Okay. So, like I said, this is really, he really lays it to those false teachers. The false teachers are already there. He's not warning of them coming. They're already there in the church. So I really, he goes on calling the church and how to respond to this, but I really want to just focus on what a false teacher is and what to watch out for. Our focus on this whole passage is really going to be the verses 12 and 13. There's a lot of poetry here that really stood out to me. The first time that I read it when I was studying this, it did, it stood out just in kind of the poetry to it, and the illustrations that he used, which I thought, once I started thinking about it more deeply and realizing what it is he's talking about, I thought there was a lot there. So I really want to do a little bit deeper of a study onto this. So when we start in verse 12, he's talked about these false teachers, what they're doing, where they came from. They're coming into the church and they're just leading the church astray. I think it's interesting and kind of important that in this entire book, even though he really lays into the false teachers, he never really specifies what it is that they're teaching. He doesn't say that they're Judaizers. He doesn't say what they're teaching that's false, just that they're false teachers. And he does, he exhorts the church to oppose the false teaching and to stand for the truth and to fight for the truth. But it's not something that he really feels the need to specify what it is that they're teaching that is false. So he's not correcting doctrine, which is kind of unusual. A lot of times when you see, someone addressing in these epistles, false teaching, they're usually saying, well, here's, the Judaizers, they're wrong because of this. They're teaching this wrong teaching. But Jude doesn't even give them the description of what it is that the false teachers are teaching. So I thought that was interesting. It's not about the content of the false teaching, which I think kind of helps illustrate kind of what I wanted to focus on today. It's not just that you should you don't need to get caught up necessarily in the specifics of what it is they're teaching, but you need to see the fruits in their lives to identify what a false teacher is. So a lot of identifying a false teacher and realizing that they're a false teacher doesn't necessarily have to do with doctrine. You don't always have it, it's not always successful. It's not always something that, your knowledge of the doctrine and what the Bible says isn't all that there is to it. There's more to it than that, where you can actually see the fruits of their life. And that's really what I wanted to talk about today. And that's what Jude wrote about. So I thought that was interesting. It's about their personal corruption and looking behind their false fronts and things that they put on and seeing to the truth of the matter. So we're really studying the person and studying the fruits in their life more so than necessarily applying it to specific doctrine that's right or wrong. And that's because we can apply the same thing to any wrong teaching, to any false teaching. I think it's also important to point out that false teaching is not the same as incorrect teaching, where I can stand up here and I can say something silly and, say a stupid mistake that I don't, that doesn't make me necessarily a false teacher. You gotta watch out for other signs. So just because I come up here and say something stupid and I didn't misinterpret something or you disagree with something, one of us may be right, one of us may be wrong, we don't know, but it's not something that, it's something that comes from the heart. It's really that false teacher that the Bible's talking about isn't someone who's just makes a mistake on something doctrine. It's something that is in the heart behind it. So something, if you're ever in my class or I'm, up here, if I say something stupid, say something wrong, you just tell me about it, talk to me about it. And I'll say, yes, I'm probably wrong and I should have done better. But that's, something that's how we should handle those sorts of things. And that's what Jude is encouraging us to do. But I want to just kind of focus on kind of the poetry that's involved here and kind of the metaphors that he's using in verses 12 and 13. So he starts off in verse 12, says, "These are hidden reefs at your love feast as they feast with you without fear." When he's talking about hidden reefs, he's talking about, reefs underwater. Whenever you're at it, out in the ocean, which I don't have a ton of experience in the ocean, but I actually was at the beach and went to the ocean this last year, so I got a little bit of an idea. But whenever you see the lighthouses and stuff, they're actually warning beacons telling ships to stay away from dangerous rocks that are underwater that you may not see. So this is and a lot of what Jude talks about, there's actually a couple of different ocean-faring terms that he's using and metaphors that he's using. But on the surface, everything looks fine. So without really investigating any further or without knowledge of what's actually happening, everything looks okay. It doesn't look like there's any problems or any troubles. But when there's hidden reefs underneath the water, that means that your boat that floats over it may hit that reef and then, it's a bad day and your boat sinks and all that stuff. So there's dangers underneath the surface. And that's kind of how, and I guess I should back up. What he's talking about in verses 12 and 13 is kind of how these false teachers operate. So he's trying to describe these false teachers so that way we know and we can apply this and know what it is that we should look out for and how we should, watch out for false teaching. So on the surface, everything looks fine, but there's something dangerous underneath. So what that's kind of pointing out is that false teachers are definitely, they can look on the surface like they're teaching right, they're living right, they're doing everything fine. They're very good at disguising themselves. But those hidden reefs, though, that hidden danger underneath. So they try and put on that face that it's hard to tell that there's anything wrong about their teaching or wrong about the way that they're living. And then it goes on, he says that, it talks about them being at your love feast, they feast without fear. So that just means that they're so good at putting on that face, and that false face, that they'll come and they'll be in the church. They'll be right there. They'll have their feasts with you. They'll come here and in the fellowship hall eat meals with you, but they can still be a false teacher. So we have to be diligent of that. And this is something that I really thought, this is not a type of a subject matter you would typically want to cover, with people who aren't believers. This is a good Sunday night sermon, if you will, where, it's, the core of the church. So we're really talking about, deeper stuff that, people who are experiencing the church ought to know, but, it's not necessarily something that's, an outreach where someone visiting, is necessarily going to be as impacted by. But we want to watch out for those false teachers because they're within the church. We talk about a lot of threats and a lot of problems and a lot of issues in the world today, but these are the issues that happen within these four walls and within the church at large. Probably, it can happen anywhere to anybody in any church. So they put on a good face. They'll, be happy and they'll eat and celebrate with you, but they're just waiting around to destroy you once you get to, what it is that they're giving you as false teaching. So you have to watch out for that. They're going to put on a good face, so you have to be able to see through that. And we do that. We'll leave that for later. Now I'm just describing everything. So the hidden reefs. At your love feast as they feast with you without fear. And then shepherds feeding themselves is the next phrase that he uses. And that's to invoke, they're saying that they're shepherds, but they're making themselves fat off of what they're supposed to be doing. Which this is actually a pretty solid reference to Ezekiel chapter 34. I should have that on the screen. But if you want to turn to that, you can. But I'll just read it's 10 verses, so it's a pretty good chunk. But we'll go ahead and read it because I thought this is all very interesting and really illustrates the idea of shepherds feeding themselves. So in Ezekiel chapter 34, verses 1 through 10, he says, "The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophecy against the shepherds of Israel, prophecy and say to them, even to the shepherds." And of course, he's talking to the priests. He's talking to the ones that are leading the church, leading Israel at the time, and should be referring. We should think of this as people within the church, the leadership of the church, that are doing things that we ought not to do. So he says, even to the shepherds, thus says the Lord God, shepherds of Israel who have been feeding yourselves, should not shepherds feed the sheep? You eat the fat, you clothe yourselves with the wool, you slaughter the fat ones, but you do not feed the sheep. The weak you have not strengthened, the sick you have not healed, the injured you have not bound up, the strayed you have not brought back, the lost you have not sought, and with force and harshness you have ruled them. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd, and they became food for all the wild beasts. My sheep were scattered, and they wandered all over the mountains and on every high hill. My sheep were scattered all over the face of the earth, with none to search or seek for them. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As I live, declares the Lord God, surely because my sheep have become a prey, and my sheep have become food for all the wild beasts, since there was no shepherd, and because my shepherds have not searched for my sheep, but the shepherds have fed themselves, and have not fed my sheep. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against the shepherds, and I will require my sheep at their hand, and put a stop to their feeding the sheep. No longer shall the shepherds feed themselves. I will rescue my sheep from their mouths, that they may not be food for them. So when Jude refers to shepherds feeding themselves, it's entrusting those shepherds. The shepherds are entrusted with the care of the flock, and they're given tools. They're given the ability to do so by the owner of the herd. Do sheep have herds? Is that what we call them? I don't even flocks. I've said flocks like a dozen times up here, and I couldn't think of the word. What's wrong with me? So you got a flock of sheep, And the owner of the flock is, has, the shepherds that are out there taking care of it. And metaphorically, that's what's happening with, leadership in a church. The pastors, the deacons, anybody else who's in a leadership role, are entrusted with that. And they shouldn't be making themselves fat off of that. And we don't have to, you don't have to look very hard in Christian culture today to see examples of pastors who are making themselves fat on the flock. If anything, that's probably more the norm nowadays when it comes to large churches. You see that a lot where people are enriching themselves. You see it on TV all the time. Every one of those TV pastors that have their private jets and all that stuff, that's what they're doing, is that they're supposed to be feeding the flock, but they're feeding themselves. And that's what he's talking about here. And that's what Ezekiel is talking about in chapter 34. Just that you're supposed to be feeding the sheep, and then you're making yourself fat off of all of this. So they're not caring for the sheep as they ought to. And then in the next section, or the next phrase, he says, shepherds feeding themselves, and then he says that they are waterless clouds swept along by the winds. So, today we don't have waterless clouds. The clouds are very full of water, and that's a good thing. And when you think of waterless clouds, you think of you're out on the day that you're planning on doing something, or you may be in the middle of doing something, and clouds are rolling in, and they look nasty. They look like you're going to have a downpour with it. So, either you're in the hayfield, and you got to put up that hay as fast as you can, so you start rushing and go crazy, and you're just bouncing across the hayfield, going at incredibly reckless speeds, trying to get the hay put up, and then you finally do, and then the rain never comes. That's what we're talking about. Or if you really need that rain, you've got crops growing and you really need rain to come so that way it brings everything back to life. And clouds are coming and you're hopeful that it's coming. So you need that rain. You see the clouds coming in. You hope that that's going to be what you need for replenishing your crops. And then they're just waterless clouds blowing over. So it looks like there's a rain coming, but nothing happens. Or if you got clothes out on the line, you look up, you see there's clouds, you think the storm's coming, and you just have to sprint out there and take all the clothes down off the line before they all get rained on. Same type of thing, where you go through all of that, you're sent to whatever action it is that you're meaning to do because it looks like rain's coming, but the rain doesn't come. So that's what we're talking about with false teachers here, is that the false teacher stands up here or wherever it may be and promises all these things that are going to happen, says all these great things are going to occur, and gets you all into a flutter to do whatever it is that you're supposed to do, and then nothing happens. So there's no, you're going through all these actions, you're having this reaction to what it is that they say that you're supposed to be doing, and whatever their false teaching is, but there's no actual water coming with that. So it looks like something's happening. It can give that appearance of something might be happening, but it never actually happens. So it's like a waterless cloud that blows in. And then the next example he uses is that they are fruitless trees in late autumn, twice dead and uprooted. So again, we're coming into autumn right now. So it's really talking about how there's a promise of a harvest. This is kind of similar to the situation with the waterless clouds, but it's fruitless trees where there's a promise of a harvest. But then once late autumn comes, the harvest should be happening. You look and then there's nothing there. So the tree didn't develop the fruit that it's supposed to. So you can't really harvest the fruit. So you got an empty harvest. So we all know what happens with those trees that don't bear fruit. They're cut off and you use it for something else. You use that land, that piece of land to try and grow another tree that will actually yield the fruit that it's supposed to. So these false teachers are fruitless trees where they come in and they say, those trees can grow big in the summertime and start to bud out in the springtime, and it looks like there's going to be a great harvest, but then when harvest time comes, there's actually no fruit there. So that's the other thing we should look out for with false teaching, is that they may look like there's, something there. It may look like there's, fruit on that tree, if you will. But when it actually comes time to the actual work and the actual production of it, there's nothing there. So in this case, a false teacher is the type that will talk about, doing work for God. But when it actually comes time to do some of that work, they have something else that they need to be doing. So that's something to watch for when it comes to false teaching. And again, like I said, these are all things that we should focus on and be aware of and be wary of, no matter what their teaching is. Whether we suspect anything, or anything, even if we've never heard anything wrong come out of their mouth, even if they stand, in whatever position that they have, if it's, me teaching a Sunday school lesson or, filling in the pulpit or wherever it may be, just anybody who has anything to say, if they're still showing these, negative things and they're, putting on the face, but they're not really there, they're not actually doing the work. I mean, whether they say something that's wrong or not, that still qualifies them, I think, as a false teacher because they're not living out what it is that they teach. So fruitless trees, again, their whole purpose, they're there to bear fruit. That's why we have those fruit-bearing trees. But when they're not bearing the fruit, they're not fulfilling their duties, they're not actually doing the work that they're put there to do. So that's something else, to look for in false teaching. And then in verse 13, it starts off with wild waves of the sea casting up foam of their own shame. Again, he's on another sea metaphor. But this is something that... there we are. The wild waves of the sea kind of refers to Isaiah 57 and verses 20 and 21. So that may be on the screen. Okay. But the wicked are like the tossing sea, for it cannot be quiet, and its waters toss up mire and dirt. There is no peace, says my God, for the wicked. So, in this case, the wild waves of the sea, casting up foam of their own shame. What this is there's a lot of movement. I thought of this when I went to the beach this last year, and like I said, it was the first time, so it's all kind of a new experience for me, but I'm sitting there watching this, and we were in Charleston, South Carolina, and I was just watching the waves come, and it kind of struck me that, when people were here 500 years ago, even though every wave moves the sand and things change that way, every wave that comes in, you'll see it come in and push the sand around. You'll see the dude who's going around digging with his metal detector and finding the stuff that you drop in the sand. And he would leave a little track around everywhere that he goes. But then the water would come up and wash it away. So that is always changing. So as the waves come in, it's always changing that. But it really goes from this end to this. It really goes from point A to point B as the tide comes in and comes out. But still, over those hundreds of years, that beach has basically been there. Charleston was established like in the 1600s when it was first settled, and I forget the history of it, so don't quote me on that. But it struck me as, the first settlers that first came there hundreds of years ago would have seen basically that same beach. Although everything has changed, every grain of sand has moved, and it moves every time that wave comes in. There's always motion there, but it's still basically the same beach. So I thought that was, interesting that, it's tossing around, it's moving all this stuff around, it's kicking up all this dirt and sand, and it's doing all this, but it doesn't actually move anything. So I think of that as kind of a busybody type of situation where, hey, this false teacher is just always trying to move and always trying to do stuff, but it's not really advancing the kingdom. It's busy work or always trying to stir stuff up among other people. It's kind of another illustration this example made me think of is, it's wild waves of the sea casting up foam of their own shame. So it's really, as they're stirring the pot, it's splashing up on them, it's, causing issues and causing problems. So that's another type of false teaching, false teacher that we should watch out for, is even though it's not actually moving, it's not advancing anything. It's not like, when those waves come in on that beach, it's not like it's just pushing that hundreds of miles into the, land. It's in that same spot. It really goes from high tide to low tide, and it just shuffles things around and moves things around just to look busy, basically, without actually advancing the kingdom any. And then the next example, which this is one that is also a seafaring illustration, is wandering stars, for whom the gloom of utter darkness has been reserved forever. So when I read wandering stars, it made me think of, navigation, when boats, especially at the time that Jude would have been writing this, it's not like we got GPS back then. So they would have been using the stars to navigate, right? So they would have, at this time the sextant wouldn't have even been invented. So they're really just going by constellations, and they're saying, okay, well, this star is here. That means this direction is the direction I need to go. And actually, you think of, early times when people started studying, astronomy and looking at the, bodies that are out in the sky, and especially at night, and looking at all the stars and stuff, you think of the stars are consistent in their position. If you're on a particular day at a particular time, it's going to be in a particular spot. And you can actually, astronomers can get very specific and scientific about that sort of stuff on exactly where things are and where they're going to be and at what time. But if you have a stray star that's just wandering around and you're trying to navigate by that, then you're going to be going in the wrong direction. So a wandering star, to me, is a planet. Stars are relatively consistent. They're going to stay there. They've been there for a long, long time. They're going to be back there at the same time next year in the same spot. But the planets don't move at the same, regular rate. And they're still predictable, but it's different from all the other stars. The stars are so far away that they appear to remain stationary, where all the other planets in our solar system are kind of moving around. So, and we can see it today. If you ever look at the night sky and you look up and you see a satellite or even the, space station, whatever else may be orbiting the Earth, something man-made that's put up there, you'll see it. It looks like a star. It's a, a little glint of light, but it's just moving across the sky. Or if you really, want to get everybody concerned and thinking aliens are coming, look at the Starlink satellites when they launch a whole row of them. I've seen that a few times, and every time someone else said, "Hi, why you? Hi." Crystal was very concerned one night whenever she saw those and thought aliens were coming or something, didn't know what it was. But they're just a line of dots. It looks weird. It is weird, but it's just satellites and stuff that's in orbit. So those are the wandering stars. So if you try and navigate by one of those satellites that you see lighting up the sky, you can't follow that because it's just wandering around. It's just moving in from place to place, and it's not consistent. It's not based in, the ancient stuff. We talk about astronomy, those, astronomers say that a lot of those stars and a lot of those galaxies, the points of light that we see in the night sky, they say that they're millions of light years away, that light takes that long to even get here on some of those. So those things are so far away. That's the type of ancient light that you can trust is consistent. But if light suddenly appears and just starts wandering around the sky, you don't want to follow that for navigation, or you're going to end up lost. And I think that's what this the point he's trying to make is. We should be rooted, a false teacher is going to come up with something new, something different, but wanders around. It's not rooted in the ancient knowledge that we have, tries to come up with new knowledge. And we shouldn't, shouldn't follow those wandering stars. We shouldn't base everything that we believe on something that, someone claiming something new. And this is, gets into Gnosticism, and that was something that probably is one of the false teachings that he's addressing. But people who claim special knowledge. So if someone, were to come into church and say, hey, I have this, God revealed this to me. I have this new revelation that no one's ever seen or heard before, or I have something new to say about this. That's where you really need to start thinking, well, that's a wandering star. That's somebody who is trying to divert us over here, even though the ancient knowledge that we have in the Bible is right here, and this is what we know and trust and should follow. You don't want to navigate by that wandering stars that just kind of pops up and wanders around. So you need to, maintain yourself in the Word to be able to follow it. So like I said, these are all illustrations that Jude has used to try and illustrate how these false teachers work. And I think that helps us identify them with each of these things. But the things that they all have in common, all these different illustrations, all these different examples, that's not to say that this one person is this type of false teacher, another false teacher is this type. They can all be all things at all times, or, focus on one particular one. But the thing that they all have consistent is that they promise something that they cannot deliver. All these false teachings, you have the one saying, the hidden reefs, there's a promise of a safe harbor. The water looks fine. We should be able to go to land here, but there's a hidden reef underneath that's dangerous and will tear up our boat. So they're promising a safe harbor, or they're promising, in the case of the shepherds that are feeding themselves instead of feeding the sheep, they promise sustenance and they promise care. Or in the case of the empty clouds, they promise rain to end the drought and to replenish our crops, but they don't deliver. There's the fruitless tree is a promise of a promising harvest, something that, will be able to be a fruitful harvest, and they don't have that. And when we talk about, the waves just rolling back and forth, it promises change, it promises something different, but all it's doing is just stirring things up and kicking things up without actually advancing the kingdom. Or the wandering stars, promising to lead you to what it is that you desire, to lead you to your destination. But all these false teachings ultimately will not get you what it is that they promise, which is consistent with all the false teaching in the Bible. And what really is what led me to studying this was cross-referenced in one of the texts, the study guides that I was using when we were talking about the temptations of Christ, the temptations that or that Jesus was presented when Satan tempted him in Matthew chapter 4. So I was going to go ahead and read Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 11, and kind of use this as a conclusion and wrap it all together. So in Matthew chapter 4, verse 1, then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these things I will give to you, if you'll fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, the angels came and were ministering to him. So again, this is a text and a passage that I'm familiar with and I've read, since, VBS and Sunday school when I was a kid. But the thing that stood out to me was all these things that the devil promises to Jesus, those are all things that he has no authority over. The devil was making promises that he has no ability to keep. In fact, he's promising to give these things to the one who actually controls all these things. So that's the type of thing we need to watch out for in false teaching, is that they're going to promise things that they cannot deliver, but the one that can deliver obviously is God. So when we look at each one of them, I want to look at these each individually quickly. When the devil tempted him and said, "Command these stones to become loaves of bread." Jesus has been fasting, and he's human. He's fully human and fully God at the same time. So he's suffering from this hunger. He's fasted for 40 days. So he's very, very hungry, and it says in the text. That's how I know. The devil came and said, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." Well, notice he doesn't come to Jesus with a loaf of bread and say, "Here, I made this, I have this, I can give this to you since you're hungry." He says, "No, you perform a miracle and do this." Jesus is the one who can do that, but the devil isn't. The devil doesn't provide anything. He tempts Jesus with stuff that only Jesus can do. And then when we put him on the pinnacle of the temple and said, "If you're the Son of God, throw yourself down, because the angels will save you." Notice he doesn't say, "I'll save you." He doesn't say, "If you cast yourself down, I'll catch you so you don't hurt yourself." He says, "The angels will save you." So again, the devil's tempting Jesus to do something, not because he's promising, not because he is offering something that he can deliver. I mean, he's just trying to get Jesus to do these things to tempt God. But it's not something that the devil has in his ability to deliver any of this stuff. And on the third one, he says he took him to a high mountain and offered him the entire world. Well, we all know that Jesus is the King of all kings and Lord of our lords, and he was there when all this was created. So obviously he's the one, he's the one that's already in control of all this. So the devil's tempting him with stuff that he already has the ability to do. So what that got me thinking, and what got me in this whole study was that anytime we were faced with false teaching, anytime that we're faced with a false teacher and somebody who's telling us things that we want to hear, they're all offering things that God has already given to us. Anybody who is a false teacher and is promising you this wealth and prosperity and all that, God has given us everything that we need. So we need to just focus on Him. and not on any promises made, because they don't have the ability to deliver on what they promise. So again, they're fruitless trees. I just really love the poetry. So I think before I close and finish things out, I just wanted to go ahead and just reread the two verses that kind of jumped out at me in Jude, and that was verse 12 and 13. So these are hidden reefs at your love feast, as they feast with you without fear, shepherds feeding themselves, waterless clouds swept along by the winds, fruitless trees in late autumn, twice dead and uprooted, wild waves of the sea casting out the foam of their own shame, wandering stars for whom the gloom of utter darkness has been reserved forever. So Jude goes on and talks about persevering and basically what the church should do and how you should fight this sort of thing and fight false teaching. But I didn't have time to take all that, so this is only like half of what there would be. So maybe I'll keep my notes and fill in again some other time. But I mean, if you're going to sit around for another hour, I could probably type something up, but we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that tonight. So that's all I have as far as the lesson for tonight. So just watch for false teaching. Again, is something that isn't even necessarily something you will necessarily detect a false teacher by what they teach, because they can still be a false teacher and teach something that's biblical for now, but they're going to change that. So watch for the fruits and the things that we talked about, and if they start making promises that they can't deliver, or if they're not putting in the work, all those things, those are the things to watch out for and the things to be watchful, so that way we can identify false teaching. And I don't bring this up because I think we have an issue or anything that I'm aware of, so just don't go around saying, well, Travis is out there talking about false teachers, so you think somebody out here has been teaching wrong. It's just something, like I said, it came up in a Sunday school lesson, and it just really struck me as anytime something jumps out at me when I do a Sunday school lesson, and I think, well, I hadn't really seen it that way, or didn't realize that, or cross-reference it to this. Anytime that something like that jumps out at me, it kind of catches my attention. And I thought that this was a good, kind of poetic way to illustrate that false teaching is out there, and we need to watch out for it. So